Welcome to Caritas Consciousness Project. I'm Gloria Cuello, and Caritas is dedicated to promoting the evolution of consciousness as the key to individual growth and global healing. And we do this online through interviews and presentations by guest speakers, classes, and study groups. We draw from a wide assortment of both ancient wisdom and leading-edge studies in science, consciousness, spirituality, and philosophy. And we've been doing this for the past almost 19 years. A couple of months, it'll be 19 years. In 2019, however, we began recording our presentations. And just a little over a year ago, I think we started a YouTube channel. And so our video recordings are now viewable through not only our website, which you can click on it on the website, and it'll open the YouTube video, but they're also available on our YouTube channel, which is called Caritas Consciousness Project. As a nonprofit organization, we rely on the support of our members and donors to keep our program going. So if you enjoy our presentations and would like to support this program, you can make a donation or become a member on our website. The memberships start at just $10 a month, and that really helps to keep us going. And now let me introduce tonight's guest speaker. Dr. Christopher Kerr is the Chief Medical Officer and Chief Executive Officer at Hospice and Palliative Care Buffalo. Born and raised in Toronto, Canada, Chris earned his MD as well as a PhD in neurobiology. Dr. Kerr's background in research has evolved from bench science toward the human experience of illness as witnessed from the bedside, specifically patients' dreams and visions at the end of life. Although medically ignored, these near universal experiences often provide comfort and meaning as well as insight into the life and the death anticipated. To date, the research team at Hospice Buffalo has published multiple studies on this topic and documented over 1,500 end-of-life events, many of which are videotaped. This work was the subject of his TEDx Buffalo talk, which has been viewed over 4.8 million times. And it's been the subject of reports on the BBC and the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Atlantic Monthly, Scientific American Mind, Huffington Post, and Psychology Today. It's also featured in a recent docuseries on Netflix called Surviving Death, and a PBS World Channel documentary called Death is But a Dream, which is also the name of his book, which is amazing. It was really beautiful book. So the book is published by Penguin Random House, which was released in 2020 in multiple languages. And with that, I am going to pass the microphone, so to speak, to Dr. Christopher Kerr. Welcome to
thank you.
TAS. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm technically challenged, so I just have to bear with me for a minute. Okay. Is that the view we're looking at? Is that got it right? Hello?
Sorry, I was already muted. Yes, it is fine. It looks great.
Oh, okay, great. Okay. Well, I kind of fell into this work by accident. I don't have any predisposition or prior interest. I was actually a cardiology fellow here in '99 and began moonlighting at hospice. And I wasn't here very long. And it was really my colleagues in other disciplines who were seemed to be acutely aware that there was the objective aspect of dying, the dimension of dying, which is, the suffering you see and the physical decline. But there was also the experiential piece of it, the subjective state, the view from the bed, the patient's experience. And what became quickly apparent to me was that patients, as they got closer to death, were having profound and intense dream experiences, and that they were, predominantly comforting and therapeutic. And what kind of ended up happening was I was trying to teach this to medical students and residents, and they really weren't having much of a part of it because they would argue there isn't much evidence for it by their standard of evidence. So that started the research. We started publishing, received very little response, actually zero, from the medical community, but then it seeped into the non-medical world and picked up by the New York Times, et cetera, and it's gone around the globe and it keeps gathering attention. So there's this very interesting disconnect between the vantage point of medicine when it comes to end of life, and then actually what people experience, either caregivers, patients, what they've witnessed, and that seemed to be very validating. It seemed to put it in a context that was necessary. So what we're talking about again is the experiential aspects, and there's nothing about this that's new. It's been described across cultures and throughout time. This is a reminder for me about this aspect of it, the multicultural aspect of it. The woman on the right is Lynette Walworth, who's a 3-time Emmy Award-winning producer. And she's actually a global authority on virtual reality. And she was doing a documentary with the indigenous people of Australia and the Amazon. And she calls me and she says, the stuff that's in your book, these folks actually have language for, these pre-death dreams and visions. So it seems to be universal. Innate to our human experience, and really, when medicine fails, dying becomes what it has always been, which is a human experience. This is actually a quote from the indigenous gentleman who was pictured there, and he says, we are sad when someone dies, but we do not fear death. And there's actually evidence suggesting that end-of-life experiences not only provide comfort and meaning, but affirm life, and in doing so, lessen the fear of dying. In this talk, this is kind of a funny story. So we knew the folks on the medical side of the fence would have trouble with this sort of thing. So what we did early on was starting to film patients. We really can't do it justice in our own words, so we let them speak for themselves. And what's kind of interesting is this footage became then part of a Netflix series and a PBS special. So you're going to see a lot of video, and where possible, we're going to include the family members, because people don't just die in isolation. They die in the context of their lives and relative to the people that they love. So this first video is of our patient, Jeannie, and her daughter, Julie. You'll notice a couple of things. Her pre-death dream experiences are described in vivid, remarkable detail. They're recalled, they feel virtual. When we ask patients to measure the realism on a 0 to 10 scale, typically the number is 10. Often we hear them describe it as they're more real than real. We also hear things, I don't normally dream, but very little is typically said between the person having the dream and the people that are in the dream, yet everything seems to be very much understood or felt. What you'll notice in all of these videos, it's fascinating, is these end-of-life experiences. By the way, the nomenclature we use is often end-of-life experience for reasons I'll explain, which is that dreams don't accurately capture it. They're so distinct from typical dreams, which is what we hear, but it's the closest analogy we have. But these experiences don't deny the reality of death, but instead kind of almost transcend it. When we when our first studies, what we did is we asked people every day before death what these experiences were like. We had a standardized questionnaire. What we found is as people got closer to death, there was a dramatic increase in frequency of these events. And the closer they got to death, the more likely they were to see people who they loved and lost. When we asked people to measure comfort relative to content, seeing the deceased provided the most comfort. So there's this built-in mechanism whereby the closer people get to death, the more likely they are to be comforted and reconnected by those they have loved and those they have lost. Here is Jeannie.
I think more and more people are getting a little bit more hip to dreams than they were before.
When I think of my mother, I just think of a really vivacious, energetic. She was the type of person that when she walked into a room, it lit up. So when I walked in one morning, she said, I had the most amazing dream. And I said, tell me about it. And she said it was so detailed and so real that she felt that it was actually happening.
I was laying in bed, and people were walking very slowly by me. The right-hand side, I didn't know, but they were all very friendly, and they touched my arm or my hand when they went by. But the other side were people that I knew. My mom and dad were there, my uncle. Everybody I knew that was dead was there. And they passed and did the same thing.
She described this as more of an event that she would believe almost happened. She knew that she didn't believe it happened because she woke up and she was at home, but she said it was as if she were in a different place.
Boy, I remember seeing every piece of their face. And I mean, I know that was my mom and dad and uncle and my brother-in-law.
That dream and her successive dreams and experiences made her feel comforted.
I felt good. I felt good to see some people. And the other ones didn't bother me either. I have seen my mother recently more. I can't say that my mother and I got along all those years, but we made up for it at the end.
And she said to me, I'm not crazy, Jewel. And I said, I don't think you are, Mom. It's okay. So,
when I told my family that I was happy about it, and that's what they asked. How does it make you feel? Well, I feel good about it.
I feel the comfort and the peace that some of these experiences brought to her gave her exactly what she needed to pass on. For me, it affirmed that you're not alone when you die.
So I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but clearly end-of-life experiences are not confusional states. And one of the things we've done in our studies is these are IRB approved studies, so they have to be witnessed, consented, those sorts of things, but we screen for delirium or confusion. And dying often includes confusional states, but that's often particularly close to the end. So the vantage point for us here is days, weeks, sometimes months before death, not the minutes and hours. We'll move to our next slide.
I think more and more people are getting.
This next video is of Florence, who was interviewed 5 days before death. In our studies, nearly 90% of people reported at least one experience that they classifies as an end-of-life experience. And of those, 85% were comforting. As I mentioned, these increased in frequency as people got closer to dying. What's fascinating in terms of content is these end-of-life experiences focus specifically on people who loved and secured them. So, and it excluded people who didn't or who conditioned their love. So it might be one parent, not another, one sibling, not the other, etc. What's really interesting is these end-of-life experiences, and in this way, they're very, very different from what I understand about near-death experiences, don't generally include great insights, epiphanies, or pronouncements. People aren't really left questions or need for analysis. The time for therapy is kind of over. They're just left with a sense of being put back together, made whole, secured, reconnected. They're about real life moments, like sitting around a kitchen table with those you love. Again, this is Florence 5 days before death, and listen as she refamiliarizes herself with a family that she loved and lost.
Tell us about the dreams.
It's very hard to pinpoint because they were so real. In all these years, my husband's been dead and my daughter.
Okay, and when did your daughter pass?
7 years ago.
Okay, at the age of 37?
Mm-hmm.
And your husband died?
61.
61, okay.
I have seen them, not their face, not their clothes, but I knew it was them. But there was nothing really remarkable to define that was Dick or John. But the other night, I fell right into a sleep. We were like sitting at the kitchen table, laughing. I could see their faces. I could tell it was their clothes. We were laughing, we were talking, we were eating. It was like a regular Sunday dinner night.
That's wonderful.
It is. And then Monday night, the same thing happened. But the same identical thing. We're laughing, we're talking, we're having a ball.
How did it make you feel?
I woke up Monday morning and I went, was that real? And I said, that was real. That was really real.
It happened.
We were sitting there as much as we were sitting here.
Okay. Have you ever had a dream that was that vivid?
No.
No. That was the most vivid dream. And we hear this a lot, and it's very hard to tell whether it's real or it's a dream. Yeah.
It made me feel like that whole 12 years had never existed.
12 years, that's interesting. 12 years since he's been gone. Okay. Because it was so real that he was there in the present.
And 7 years since my daughter was gone. Mm-hmm. It was like we were always together, never separated.
Yeah. How does it make you feel about the prospect of dying? How does it change your view?
I'm not afraid of dying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Does it make you think you're going to see them?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If I quit swearing.
If you what?
Quit swearing.
Oh, you're worried you're going to end up in the wrong place. I have a feeling you're okay. It's interesting that you can be in a dying process and at the same time feeling very much alive, right? And that made you feel alive.
Okay.
So dying is witnessed by both Jeannie and Florence, and it is really this paradox. They're physically declining, yet emotionally and spiritually they're very alive and vibrant. Both women, as they're near death, kind of relay this sense of being connected, of being made whole. We looked at this question of whether people could be, whether dying includes positive psychological change, and these results have been published. What we did is we used validated measures for something called post-traumatic stroke growth, this idea that within a negative experience such as war, there could also be positive psychological gains. And what we found was that people who are having these experiences compared to those who didn't were showing positive growth right up until the last days of life. They were gaining insight, understanding, and adapting. In other words, the data suggests that people don't stop living. because they are dying right up until the very end.
Tell us about.
So people die how they live, and it's not surprising then that 18% of our study patients reported dreams that were actually discomforting. What this was overly simplified, though. What got lost in the classification is that the discomforting dreams were often some of the most meaningful, the most transformative. The next video is a little hard to watch. It's of a gentleman named Dwayne. He was in his 40s and he had head and neck cancer. He had a life that's difficult to describe. He was born in poverty, multi-generational addiction. He started using crack in his early teens and had spent more of his life in prison than out. But he was also very funny, social, and a devoted father. He had one of those lives where he really couldn't afford to look back or with regret until he started to die. And then he had some pretty profound experiences, what I'll let the video show. But what was more important is he came out of this with a need to say he was sorry to the person who mattered most, which was his daughter. So here's the video of Dwayne.
You know, I had a lot of good dreams that I was mad that I got woke up from, and I tried to hurry up and get back to sleep so I can get back into it, and I couldn't, you know, because it was a good one.
What were you dreaming about in those ones?
Oh, you don't want to know about that one. You don't want to know about them. My dreams, man, you know, my nightmares, I don't like them. I think it's because my past is coming back to me, you know, from doing wrong. Because I'm not gonna say I'm the perfect guy when I was out there, because I was running the streets, you know, doing wrong to individuals that I knew I shouldn't have been doing wrong to. Now they caught up with me, and now they know my symptoms. They know I'm sick, so now they want to try to hurt me. You know, it was like they were jigging a knife, you know, trying to cut out, you know, my neck, where my cancer was at.
Right.
That's scary. It's scary to me. I'm not a bad individual, man, but I done crossed a lot of people in my life, you know, and I need help. I need help, you know. I don't want to live my life being out in society walking, have to look over my back, man. I just want people to forgive me. And please know that I was sick at the time when I was doing certain things that was hurting them and their families. You know, that's all I want. I don't want them to look at me as a bad individual, because I'm not. You know, I need help. I need help.
And at that time, like, I hadn't known who got me out. I thought it was my attorney, and comes to find out it wasn't even my attorney. It was Chris. I had went and I came through the front door, and when I turned the corner, like, he was just walking with his walker, and I said, "Hey, old man." And it was like, I guess he heard my voice and he just like froze and like stuck, and he lifted his head up and he moved that walker and he snatched away from her and he just started walking towards me all fast. And we just like stood there for, I want to say like 3-4 minutes, and we just cried. And he just like kept saying like how sorry he was and like he didn't mean it. And I just told him, don't worry about it, I'm home, you know, I don't even care about that. That was the longest I actually really ever hugged my dad, ever in life. Like, I've hugged my dad all the time, but standing there hugging him for that long again. Like, my family always, "Oh, you just worship him like he just, hello, yeah, that's my dad."
So again, it's this idea of these sort of more negative end-of-life experiences being transformative. So they got together, and she spent every day with him until he died, and he slept peacefully. One of the problems doing formal studies, it often excludes people, largely because of issues of consent, who are cognitively different. So people, for example, with dementia. And yet people with diagnoses such as dementia or Down syndrome have very rich emotional inner lives and histories that often resurface at the end. The following video is of a woman, excuse me, named Sue, and she's talking about the final days of her 97-year-old, very demented mother named Irene. Irene lived in a nursing home near Buffalo, which is obviously not too far from the wedding capital of the world, Niagara Falls. And her husband's name was Gary. So here is her story.
So there was a lot of talk about, I had a dream last night and Gary was there, or Gary came to visit me, or we had dinner together. And she got to the point where she didn't even talk about it in terms of dreams. She talked about, I had dinner with your dad and Gary last night. That was not every day, but probably 2 or 3 times a week within the last year or 6 months.
So pretty frequent.
Pretty frequent. And she was very animated about it, very happy. And she didn't even talk about them as dreams. To her, they were something that happened last night. So they made me feel wonderful, because as I was getting off the elevator and thinking, I'm wondering what we're going to talk about today, because sometimes she didn't remember what they did during the day while I was at work, or maybe who else was there, but she always remembered her dream or vision or whatever she had. When I saw her that day, I was like, Mom, why did you go outside? You never go outside. You know, somebody's supposed to go with you. And she looked at me like, well, I was going to meet your father. And I said, well, where were you going? How were you going to get there? And she just kind of looked around. Well, that wasn't the issue. The issue was that she was going to meet him. So then I didn't know what to say at that point, and I said, well, where were you going? And she said, well, we were going to Niagara Falls to get married. Life was different for her those last couple months, because she had like something to talk about, something to look forward to, and those dreams were pepping her up, were making her happy, were making her almost look forward to go to sleep, which I think is great. Seeing that and being a part of it is a gift. And it was a gift for me. And I think it's a gift that should be shared. At the end of our life, there's a lot of spiritual, emotional work that is being done, and changes that are happening that, I don't know, are we too afraid to recognize it, or you think there's not enough time, or whatever. But I think it's as important, if not more important, than the physical things that we have to check off on the chart.
So we're kind of seeing the same thing again and again. As people are approaching death, when one might assume escalating or increasing psychogenic distress, the actual opposite is happening. So in Irene's case, she's very near death, and she's what she's trying to do is get out of the nursing home, because she's re-experiencing the best day of her life, which is the day she was married.
So
most people can readily identify with this beautiful refrain from Dylan Thomas, this notion about fighting against death, the dying of the light. It's beautiful, lyrical, but it's probably not all that accurate. Before he put pen to paper, what he was doing was he was imagining death, not actually experiencing it. And there may be a paradigm shift between what's imagined and what's real. The patients in our study actually aren't fighting against anything, but towards anything. And most commonly, their struggle is to reconnect with those whom they loved. I'm very fond of this next video. It's of a gentleman named Horace. And just a couple of things to pay attention to. In his dreams, who he's referencing is his deceased wife. And you can see he kind of becomes overwhelmed with emotion and struggle to find the language for what he's feeling. He certainly doesn't show signs of fear or fight or struggle, but instead he's warmed and relieved by the feelings of this reclaimed love.
There's this just mass green, like a pasture or green, green grass. But again, hard to describe because it was a color green that I've never seen before. It was so vivid and so, it was like lifelike. And it felt good. My wife all of a sudden appeared, and I'm thinking, well, this is even better yet. She had a certain smile about her that it was kind of like a joke. It was like I got you. And I'm wondering, what is the joke? What do you know? Why can't you talk to me? She just, there's just no conversation.
Yeah.
Well, she was always beautiful to me. But she was even prettier. She was. She knew me inside out. You know.
Yeah.
So maybe I guess maybe words weren't necessary. We just look at each other and knew exactly what one was thinking. It was just a good time. I don't know. But everything had left you, there was no problems. No, everything was happiness. It was like you wish the world was really felt good.
Yeah.
Felt like there was when you finish paying a bill that's been bugging you for years.
Relief.
It was that relief that it was gone. And it was, it was just a relief. Everything was okay.
Children aren't included in our formal studies, but we have published a case series. We have one of the largest palliative care programs for children in the country here in Buffalo. Understandably, children's experience at end of life is unique, as this poem refers to by Dickinson. This notion of faith anew, they don't often have reference points for death or an understanding of mortality. They live in the present, and they may not have known anyone who's actually died. though they do most often know animals that have, whether it was their pet or somebody else's pet. Either way, the message seems to be the same for them, that they're loved, they're secured, and most importantly, they're not alone. The following video is of a 13-year-old wonderful young lady I cared for named Jessica. She's near death at the time of this video. In addition to seeing the return of her deceased dog Shadow, she dreams of a mother figure. She was raised by a single mom, and her fear was, of course, who was she, how was she without her mom? And then she dreams of her mother's friend. So here is Jessica.
Mary is my mom's, one of her best friends that she passed away from leukemia. And
How long ago?
2005.
Okay.
And I think I was pretty close to her.
Uh-huh.
And she was very close to my mom. She was nice. Okay. And what happened was I seen her in my mom's room, and I was just coming up the stairs and going into my room, but I stopped because I seen something at the corner of my eye. Mm-hmm. And she was playing with my mom's curtains, and she had her favorite shirt on, my mom told me, because I told my mom it was gray and blue checkered shirt, like a flannel shirt that she had on. And she was playing with her curtains, and my mom's phone was charging, and she was looking down at my mom's phone, and I told my mom that, and my mom was pretty shocked, and I said, see, she's probably happy that you did a good thing, and she's coming to say hi. And I had a feeling that she was just coming to tell me that you're going to be okay, everything's fine, but she didn't look at me. She was just looking, but I had a feeling if I called out her name, she would look at me, but I didn't want to scare my mom.
How did it make you feel? What did you get from her? What did you feel from seeing her?
I felt a sign of relief.
Yeah.
And happiness, because she was a very strong person, and I know that I'm strong, and my mom tells me all the time that I'm like her.
And you told me that you thought that, oh Mom, I saw an angel. That's how you said you
I
felt, and you
saw
felt
an
peace,
angel.
and then
I
you were
felt
able to go to
peace.
sleep.
And then I was able to go to sleep.
So it was really comforting.
That was comforting, yes.
You weren't afraid.
I wasn't afraid of it at all. My dreams that I have are good dreams now, which I dream about my old dog Shadow that has passed away, and I see him, and he's in a good place, and he's running, he's having fun, but then again he runs away and I never see him again. I feel like it's his meaning of saying goodbye. I have an occasionally where he comes to see me, I have a feeling to have him say it's okay, that I'm in a safe place enough.
He comes with a meaning for you, and that meaning is.
We were close. Even though I didn't like him half the time because he would always be on my butt, but I still loved him. Yes, I do have to sort out what's real and what's imagined. I usually just try to lay there in my bed and try to reenact that dream and just think about what just had happened to wake me up.
Yes.
But I do get afraid because I see how dark my room is, and I look on the ground, and the one night I happened to see a long black thing, and that was him by my bed. Yeah, and then I went down to the ground and went like that, and it looked like his head went up, and then he was gone.
Okay, so you do things when you wake up to check to see.
They're really there.
Yeah.
I feel that meaning is meaning of love. And that they're there and they're always going to protect you.
It's funny because he doesn't say anything to you.
No, dogs don't talk.
No, but dogs give messages.
Yeah, they give you a message of heal and love, that you're okay.
Okay, so that's Shadow.
That's Shadow.
So dying is a closing of a life, which is defined largely by our relationships. More recently, we've been very interested in studying the effect of end-of-life experiences on bereavement and to date have published 2 papers on this, which included surveys and interviews with approximately 750 bereaved family members. I won't go into detail. The results are best summed up by saying what's good for the patient is good for their loved one. How you see or witness somebody leave the earth absolutely frames, influences how they're remembered and how one grieves. This was quantifiable. We used validated measurements of grief and family members and loved ones who witnessed patients having comforting end-of-life experience, reported overall improved grief processing, acceptance of loss, working through pain, remembrance, etc. This is a gentleman named Norb who's discussing the dying experiences of his late wife.
She started like chanting, I'm going home, over and over and over again. And that's kept up almost all afternoon. I'd give her a drink or something, bring her bed up, and as I brought her bed up, her head would go up and still stare at the ceiling real hard. About, I'll say right around 3 o'clock, I said to her, what are you staring at so hard up there? She says, it's the angels. They're coming down to take me home to heaven. And those were the last words that I ever heard her speak. She was total content. She had been fighting cancer for about 13 years prior to that there. And I knew that now she was at total ease. She's done. It was the end, and she realized that she was happy that she was gone.
And how does that make you feel?
It put me at ease also, knowing that. It's been hard at times to grieve her loss, but knowing how she died, what mood she was in when she died, has put me at great ease over it, really.
Now, do you think, often about that experience? Do you ever revisit
Oh, yes.
it?
Oh, yes, I think of it there a lot. And still, how I can hear her chanting over and over and over again. It's made me feel at ease, knowing that she was at total at ease when she died. It wasn't that she was suffering or anything. She was happy that she was going. And the angels were coming to get her. Definitely has been ease as far as my grieving over her loss, knowing that, hey, that she was at ease when she died. Who do I want to dream of? Her waiting for me up at the gate. She's the love of my life, and I want to be back with her.
Is there anything else you would like medical professionals who take care of people who are dying to know about these experiences?
I think it's a field that really should be looked into deeply. That it's something that affects everybody. It affects everybody differently. The person that's losing somebody it affects, as well as the person that goes. And what their feelings are at the time has a great effect on the survivors, so as to speak. And to know that they went out happy, in a good mood, not suffering, hey, that's the main thing. She started like...
There's this tendency to romanticize or sensationalize the last words and experiences of the dying, yet, as I said, they're rarely about deep philosophical or religious pronouncements, epiphanies, or punchlines. Instead, their end-of-life experiences focus on what matters most, our relationship, often our family. There's a beautiful piece written by a chaplain by the name of Kerr. She says, the first and usually last classroom of love is a family. So in the case of Florence shown earlier, it was dreams of her husband and daughter sitting at the kitchen table. Often the richest richness of end of life. The connectivity is between and across lives, whether they're living or whether they're dead. It's often found in simple, often symbolic, everyday events, such as making spaghetti sauce. And this is a very interesting video of a woman named Jennifer.
So this is the one and only picture that exists of Patrick and I that was snapped by my niece at a wedding, because neither one of us are overly photogenic and it just wasn't our style. And this picture, because we did not live together, we each owned our own home, went back and forth for 15 years on each other's mantles. Patrick didn't cook with one single exception of making his grandmother's sauce, which he did, I want to say, about every 4, 6, 8 weeks through the entire 16 years I knew him. Patrick was the only member of his family that knows how to make the sauce. And for all the years I knew him, he insisted something was missing.
After his grandmother had passed?
After she had passed. And she had passed well before I had ever met him. I even tried to help him make it once, and I got banned from the kitchen because he insisted that an Irish woman was no way could ever make old-fashioned Italian sauce like Grandma used to make. Fast forward to this would be the Sunday before he passed. He woke up in the morning and I couldn't get him to eat. He wasn't hungry, total loss of appetite. And I'm like, baby, we got to make you something for breakfast. What do you want? He goes, I'm full. I said, Pat, you had a snack pack pudding yesterday. You're not full. And he's like, oh, no, I ate with Nana Dolores last night. As real as I'm sitting here, he believed he made sauce with his grandmother the night before, said he could smell it, he could still taste it, he was full from it, and she showed him after all these years what he had done wrong, which is the very last step before you take it off the burner was to add a teaspoon of sugar. It was so very real for him, to the point, there I am, putting on sweatpants, driving to the grocery store, because we spent the next 7.5 hours, because that's how long it takes, making his grandmother's sauce that day. So, and he was so sick, and it was the only day I was ever allowed to help him. As he sat on the bar stool, and, well, let's say was very strict with the orders of the sauce, and we kept bringing the pot over, so there are certain things only he could do. We made the sauce, he added the sugar. Last time Patrick ever ate. Every morning he woke up saying, is today the day I'm going to die? And I said, you'll go when you're ready. And he was ready.
He was ready. And you knew he was ready.
And I knew he was ready from this.
Yeah.
I think this is a man who is at peace and very honest. If your last dream in life is about spaghetti sauce, there's nothing more peaceful than that. It didn't appear to be a memory. To him, it appeared that he was participating. And that's one of the things I found very different.
Did that dream help you accept that reality further?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely. And not only the reality that he is gone, it's made me think of maybe there is something out there after we go.
It's Jennifer. I just want to finish with an interesting patient story. Her name, the young lady whose video you're going to see, is named Sierra. And one of the things that's fascinating is people obviously die differently depending on where they are in life. For example, people in their 8th or 9th decade maybe have lost so many of the people they love. They've aged, they've physically declined, they're more comfortable resting, versus somebody who is younger, has children, people who are still dependent, an unfinished life. For them, end of life is obviously a different issue. And what's fascinating is what we see time and again is people who are having trouble with this acceptance are often self-informed and given peace by their kind of inner experiences to helps them accept. And this is really the story of Sierra.
Sierra was a 28-year-old African-American woman. She was diagnosed with colon cancer after what seemed like far too long between the presentation of her symptoms and the actual diagnosis. So she went for many months undiagnosed. By the time she was diagnosed, her cancer was already too far advanced to really make an impact or extend her life.
Sierra was very determined to do absolutely everything she could to fight her disease for her son, for her fiance, and for her family.
She was clearly not in the mindset of a dying person. She had little to no insight, at least insight that she would admit to, of the fact that she was nearing the end of life or even heading towards the end of her life.
Her family was not at all ready to see her go. They loved her and they wanted her to fight this as well.
After we had a meeting, a very touching meeting, where the son finally put words to what was the experience in the room, and that is the question, is my sister going to die? At that point, we decided that we better move the meeting into Sierra's room.
We all gathered together with Sierra. Her mom, her stepdad, her siblings, and her care team here at the hospice inpatient unit. Dr. Farrell was with her, speaking to her, trying to explain to her what we were no longer able to do for her medically.
During that time, what happened was something most profound, and that was that Sierra actually engaged her predeceased grandfather right in the room.
It happens every single time I talk about it. I get goosebumps, I get this sense of amazement and emotion to be there with someone when they experienced a vision like that. She saw her grandfather.
Afterwards, Sierra's mother said, "What did he say?" And he said, "I'm very proud of you. You are a wonderful granddaughter. You are a wonderful daughter. You are a wonderful mother." As the conversation was going on, Tammy asked Sierra, "What is he saying to you now?" He's saying, "I'm going to see you soon, and everything is going to be okay." At that point, Tammy said, "Listen to your grandfather." And it was at that point, really, that the family knew that Sierra's time was limited.
It was probably less than a week after that vision that she was able to let go and she passed. If we discount end-of-life dreams and visions, we're doing a disservice to our patients, to their families, and how they are able to not only experience the loss of a loved one, but how they then are able to grieve later.
I think she gained the comfort that she needed, not to give up, but to be at peace peace and let whatever was going to happen. I think her grandfather being there, of course, made it a lot more comforting for her. I think had Sierra not had those visions, I think she would have been more frightened. I think she may not have had that, I don't want to say easiness, but that I think she would have been more compelled to vocalize how frightened she was. But knowing that he was there for her, it made it very much easier for me, because I knew she would have him to be with and he would take care of her. It does help me process the loss, because I believe they visit us, both of them. You know, I think, things happen for a reason. And yes, she's not in pain anymore, and she's back to her healthy, playful, joyful self, and he's there to watch over her as he did here. When it comes to dealing with patients who have these experiences, is not to dismiss their feelings and what they are relaying to you, what they've seen, who they're speaking with, because it's real. It's not, in my opinion, it's real. To them, it's real.
I think in the interest of time, so we have time for discussion, I'm going to stop here, go back to the other screen. There we are. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Great.
That was wonderful, and I'm sure there will be quite a few questions. I just want to change my view. There we go. I can start us off, and then when you ask a question, if you have your video on, you can just unmute and ask your question. If you have a question and your video is off, then please type it into the chat rather than asking it out loud, because on the recording, you get this horrible screen with this big camera and slash through it. Doesn't look good. So then I have to put something on it, which also makes it look like the video has stopped. So if you don't have your video on and you want to ask a question, type it in the chat and I'll be happy to ask it. I'll read it. And if you have your video on, you can just unmute and ask your question. So one thing I was wondering is, can you tell us what strides are being made in the medical arena in terms of acceptance of deathbed visions as important to a patient's emotional well-being and transition? I mean, I know your research is helping. I'm hoping it's helping. Certainly seems like it should. Do you see any strides being made? Do you see any changes happening?
No. At our end of healthcare, in many ways, things are worse. Care is more fragmented than ever. The role of the primary Marcus Welby is gone. You tend to start this assembly line where you're seen by multiple physicians. It's an organ system-based approach, so it really doesn't take consideration of the person's totality, not only from a physical sense, from a holistic sense, spiritual sense, psychological sense. I think what's changed is that the newer generation, baby boomers included, who are aging, don't want the doctor's death. They want a dying process in which they have a say, in which they matter, preferring to be at home with family rather than in a hospital. So I think it's being reclaimed in an interesting way. So I don't hold out hope for the medical community at all, but I do hold out enormous hope for people who are living it. That's some of it, I think.
Yeah. In hospice, it sounded like reading your book, in the hospice where you work, there's a tremendous acceptance and awareness of, this dying process and the experiences that are typical of
Yeah. And I think that's true of all most hospices I've had anything to do with. And it's really interesting. The people who are closest to the bedside, aides, nurses, you're usually not telling them anything they don't know. They can usually take you to school when it comes to understanding what patients are experiencing. It's the people who are farther, particularly on the physician side, who might not have the same awareness. So it was interesting when we were gathering patients, a lot of our referrals would come from nurses' aides. They're the ones who are actually at the bedside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wanted to read one little passage from your book. It's on page 69, and it's part of the story of Patricia, who had never, I'm trying to remember what her situation was with her mother.
Her mother had
little. She died when she was little.
Yep.
Okay. So it says those who are dying may be physically deteriorating at life's end, but the emotional and spiritual identity and connection they manifest in their dreams and visions remain unimpeded and omnipresent. In this sense, end-of-life experiences do not deny our finality so much as transcend the physicality of dying to create a more meaningful transition. They represent a therapeutic opportunity and a form of healing beyond cure. On one of my last visits with Patricia, I asked her, who would you want to see in your dreams going forward, even though I already knew the answer? As predicted, she replied, I'd like to see my mother because I never got to know her. I went to see Patricia one last time before she died. She could no longer speak and looked unresponsive. I bent over and asked her in a whisper if she had seen her mother, not truly expecting an answer. She smiled, nodded, and pointed upward. I thought that was just a typical and very beautiful description of someone's last experiences.
She was actually one of the more fascinating people I've ever taken care of. Her mother died, I think she was 11, and her the last time she saw her, she was at the door of the room at a time when children weren't really allowed in, and she was trying to show her report card because she had gotten A's. And her father had lung disease, so she immediately fell into a caregiving role, never was formally educated. It was the most educated person, most well-read person I ever met. She read 2 books a week. She's the star of the PBS because she's just delightful and has a roaring intellect. But she lived with this wonder, doubt, awareness, whether her mother would approve of her. Because she never really had validation or knew her. And that kind of haunted her. And it's kind of interesting because everybody's has lesions for having lived. And one of the things you see is that whatever that is often gets addressed at the end of life. So that's what I meant by the healing. So whether it's the need to be forgiven, like Dwayne, to be reconnected, to be loved, it seems to occur. So it was no surprise that the central loss, defining loss of her life, was her mother in childhood. And what's so fascinating in a lot of those experiences with childhood loss is that the notion of time and distance vanish. So it's not uncommon to see somebody who's in their 90s who lost a parent as a child, but they sense that mother, they smell the perfume, they hear the words "I love you," they're just present for them to feel. And my sense was that was Patricia's case.
Yeah. Yeah. Stephanie is asking, can he talk more about ones who have had difficulty with family members? And did the difficult ones show up upon death?
No. There seems to be this kind of final justice or editing process that goes on. I've even had somebody who had 3 husbands, and the one they loved was really the second, and that's the one they focus on. The 1 and 2 disappear. A great example is had a patient who lost his arm as a child and had a number of siblings, several who were loving and supportive and helpful, 2 who teased and humiliated. So those 2 don't show up. Often it's one parent and not the other. And there's a great story of that in the book of a woman who had a mother who was extraordinarily demanding and never expressed love, never touched, and yet a father who was a mailman who was nurturing and loved unconditionally. And the 2 of them had this kind of life and love outside of the house. He was a mailman. And in her childhood, she would know when he was on his route, run through the woods, go to this clearing he would meet. They would hold hands, sing songs, and have a different type of connection before they went back to the house. And of course, in dying, and she's in the videos as well, that's where she returns. The clearing in the woods.
Mm-hmm. I love the story about Eddie towards the beginning of the book. And one of the things that both Eddie and Dwayne had very frightening dreams, very disturbing dreams. And yet the dreams seem to clear the way or bring out the emotions they had repressed and able to heal them. And without those disturbing dreams, I don't think it would have happened. Do you?
No, not at all. Particularly in Eddie's case, because he had been a policeman who had a lifetime of criminality, essentially. And he had to hide and repress it for the sake of his job, for his identity, for how he was viewed by people. And then he had to go through this very cathartic piece. It's very interesting because what happened was Eddie was, the New York Times were here and they met it. She met Eddie and she comes out and she goes, "That's the least comforting dream I've ever heard about in my life," because he just went through hell. But he found his way.
Yeah. And without those dreams, I think he, it makes me think
absolutely.
About,
yeah. And we've seen that with veterans who
Mhm.
suffer with PTSD and survivor's guilt for decades and decades. Is, the peace they couldn't find through therapy or medication or whatever they found at their end of their life,
Mhm.
which is just remarkable.
Yeah. Paul has a question. Paul, you're muted.
Yes. Well, first of all, let me say thank you for all the work you've done and for your courage in doing it. I think that's remarkable. My question is this. When I was pretty young, decades and decades ago, I had the miraculous opportunity to study with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
Oh, wow.
And it was really my first introduction to the whole thought of death and dying as a something unique, a unique part of the life cycle, and that it wasn't something to be shunted away or, made clinical. And over the years, I stood by in sort of abject horror, looking at how scientific materialism has corporatized and monetized the death process. And I know this is a hard question. It's quite a machine, and it's a big machine, but how do we resist the machine, in your opinion?
In terms of the profiteers in and around dying?
Yeah, just the whole, impersonality of typical medical care, and with the vast corporatization going on, death is just seen as another commodity to monetize. They don't care about the client; they just want to make money off the process.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny because I was having to write a board report about this today. So New York is one of the last states that has a certificate of need. So we're one hospice per county, and we're largely not. We are all non-for-profit with the exception of some downstate. We were the 10th in the country. There's now 6,000. When I started doing this work, 2% of us were 2% of hospices were for profit. It's now about 70, with some of the largest being people like the ChemLawn companies that spray your lawn, and they're seeing enormous profits, upwards of 20% yearly. So I think what's happened is you've taken a great cause and a great service, and people have managed to find opportunity. The expression in the military industrial complex, we now have a health industrial complex, and with too many pigs at the trough. I don't know. We're fighting like hell here at a legislative level to maintain our status so that we aren't swamped by for-profits. Because all the quality indices go down. Obviously, if you want to make a margin, we lose money every year, up to $6 million a year. They're not obviously going to do that. I don't know what it's going to take to get for America. It's hard because I'm Canadian, where our medicine is a lot different. I don't know what it's going to take for. It depends what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to create an economy in healthcare, you've done it. If you're trying to manage its citizens well and create accessible, high quality care, you haven't. So America's now about 33 in the industrialized world in terms of outcomes, including things like infant mortality. I'll stop there, but you understand where I'm coming from. I agree. We're fighting the fight, but greed's a tough thing to fight against.
So what I'm hearing is our best bet is to just say no.
Yeah.
As individuals, just say no.
Yeah. I think you're probably right. Yeah.
Stephanie has a question. Have you had patients describe a life review before they passed? And did family members notice a change in their loved ones before they passed? Well, I think we've seen them in the video.
Yeah, definitely in terms of the latter. In terms of life review, I guess it's how you define it. By review, you would think in more totality. And I don't think that happens. You hear that. There seems to be so many differences. I'm by no means an expert on near-death experiences, but those seem to be more classically a review of life. And people almost come out structurally changed with a powerful need to either proselytize or write a book, or there's a change in perspective, live differently. There's really some impressive stories about that. Tends to be not what we hear. There's no need to share even. necessarily. It's their wholly owned experience. It just is. It belongs to them, and they don't ask for. I've never had a patient once say, "What do you think it means?" So there's no metaphor, no translation, and I don't think it's review. It tends to focus on very specific things, formative experiences, formative people in one's life, defining. Things that need to be addressed are addressed, singular events that we're really shaping, not necessarily a review in totality. That may happen, I think, earlier in disease when people, may have terminal illness and are reviewing those classic dreams. That may be the case. I just don't see it at the end of life.
Maria, you want me to read your question rather than your asking? Okay. Maria asks, my father passed away in hospice at home, and it was a great blessing. Have you considered doing interviews for patients who have these experiences in their homes, as far as resisting the health industrial complex? Perhaps a living will could help.
Yeah, and there's something called dignity therapy, which is really interesting. It allows kind of a guidebook on how people to document and explore these things. We've done a lot. Sorry?
Could you repeat that? What is it called?
Dignity therapy.
Dignity therapy. Okay.
Yeah. A lot of our studies are based in the home. So the vast majority, we take care of about 1,200 people a day, and the vast majority are in home. So we have, we've absolutely, the early studies were done in our hospice inpatient unit. But what we wanted to do is, what we were kind of surprised when we started this work, we were mostly looking at people who were 2 weeks, 3 weeks before death. So we wanted to go upstream. So we went and started interviewing patients who were in their homes and trying to catch it pre-onset and see what the changes were over time. So yeah, that's exactly what we did. It's a good question.
Yeah. Lynn or Tara?
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you? I am very intrigued in this kind of research. I was a neuroscience major at my school, and actually did look at like a lot of near-death experiences. So I guess just for you and your research, like what are your next questions, and like what's like the future of this kind of research for you?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, we're doing it now. And so we did a couple of things. So we did the first study basically showed what we know. It was more quantifiable, content, comfort, change over time, frequencies, all those sorts of things, just to give it validity. Then we did that post-traumatic growth, where we looked at, is there living within dying, and what was the impact? The next series of questions really go to the existential impact. So how did this change their perception of dying, what dying meant, what life meant, whether that changed their belief systems? So really a much higher level, secondary level question to what was the translation to the patient, which I think is really interesting. So it's ultimately, that's the question. What did it mean to that person? So it's the real look under the hood, I think, is what we're doing now to ask those questions. So we kind of, yeah.
I'm wondering too if there's any kind of connection to like almost belief of spirituality or religion to people who have these experiences, or it doesn't matter. Like across the board, these people have these experiences.
It doesn't seem to make a lick of difference. And this is kind of interesting. And there were some of the people who did this work, we were the first ones who asked patients directly. Usually that's hard to do because the university IRB doesn't, sterilizes dying, and you're not supposed to interfere with dying people, kind of thing. So the early studies in the 70s were done by people like OSIS, and they did them large-scale surveys of caregivers, doctors, pastoral care nurses, and they did them in India and the United States. And what they found was belief system, religious identification didn't seem to matter. and there was very little religious content. And, we found the exact same thing. Very little religious reference. And that was kind of a struggle because, how do you report that to people who have strongly held beliefs? And I referenced Kerr Egan, who is a Harvard Divinity trained pastor, and she wrote a beautiful piece that was on CNN and The Wire, and she's written several books. And that's the woman I quoted. Said, our first, where we first learn of love is not church, but within our family, and that's the classroom, and that's where people return to. And so, what it comes down to, our translation, our interpretation, is that it's less about the symbolism of religion. It's more about the tenets of the core tenets of religion, which are, love and forgiveness, and they're abound. So one interpretation of this, there's nothing in this as anti-religious. It's just not the religious interpretation some might see. We absolutely asked people about what their beliefs were as part of our study. The problem with that is people lie like hell. So they're trained to say, yeah, I'm Catholic all the way through, and meanwhile they haven't been to church in a million years, but it's almost reflexive. So who really knows, when you ask those questions almost on a demographic basis, what someone's actual belief is? So I always had trouble with that, because so often you get people who qualify it. They'll say, yeah, I'm Baptist, or I'm this and that, and then they say subsequently, but I don't practice. So I never know what it means. But it's a good question. But we just don't hear, very rarely do we, even amongst the religious, we've had priests and nuns, and we just don't hear those. It's not like we never have, but we just don't hear those things referenced.
My mom just has a question too.
Hi, I'm Lynn, and
Hi.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing all of this.
Oh,
and
you're welcome.
Not only the book, but also this is unique. So I personally am from Buffalo. I grew up there, and
You're kidding.
No. I grew up in West Seneca, but went to school in South Buffalo. So went to Mount Mercy Academy.
Yeah. I'm in Cheektowaga.
Okay, I know Cheektowaga well, but I have to say, because I went to grad school in Buffalo, and in Boston. I've been here ever since. I want to say that Buffalo is this unique community that is just so warm and friendly, and has some of those traditions relative to the Polish community, or the Irish community, or the Italian community. And some of what we saw in the videos today were really brought it back to family. And I've lived in, Boston for, since I was 21. And so I find that what you're finding there in Buffalo is really unique, in this tie to family. Whereas if you took it to somewhere else, another area, would there be this person, because in an area like Boston or New York City, people are so unplugged from their family and maybe so tied to their success. What happens when you take your research to another area as people go through the same process?
I gotta thank you. I think that is such an interesting observation, really. So I'm from Toronto, and
great city, great city.
Yeah, it is. But I completely get, for those of you who don't know, Buffalo is a city of true neighborhoods that are bound by ethnicity and culture, ties to church. So there's a Polish, German, Italian, and they're deeply rooted. And because Buffalo has very little influx or efflux, it's not uncommon to find multi-generational people still on the same block everywhere. Go to the same church. There's that their grandparents or great parents. It really is. It's a great secret, this place.
As I'm about to go back to, I think it's my high school reunion. I graduated 82 too. And even still, as we go back to this high school reunion, people talk about what parish they came from to come to our
Yes.
high school.
Yeah.
So in other words, there's still the factions as to what parish they grew up in.
Yeah.
And I was from just West Seneca, which wasn't right in the city. So
No.
there wasn't that parish.
Boy, South Buffalo is.
Right, exactly.
I mean, South Buffalo is a world unto itself. By the way, it has a complete revival, right? It's fascinating.
Oh, I'm so excited about it.
Yeah,
I love all that's happening.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, it's a wonderful. It certainly has influenced people's experience because they do have a sense of belonging in a village, and we've seen this particularly with people. There was a video I skipped over of Maggie who had some cognitive deficits, but was richly bound to her neighborhood, her family, her history, and she was flooded with that imagery at the end of life. You're spot on. I never thought of it honestly. So thank you for the question. But people's experiences are contextualized. Yeah.
Let me just share, and what really struck me too, as the leader of Apple died with his pancreatic cancer, and
wow.
Right. And what he talked about was, in that long, whether this is truth or not, but to me, there was that Facebook post as to what he shared in his last, I have all the money in the world, but this is what I didn't do. So to me, and that's the contrast, so the area that you're in, I think, is so enriched with what we talk about as a strong sense.
It really does affirm that aspect of life, which is connectivity.
Yeah.
That you can't, that it's so defining and can't be shook. It really is. And it's fascinating when you're there in the moment because it really does transcend a generation. So you'll see a grandchild with a grandmother who's seeing her grandmother, and the weave is remarkable.
Totally agree.
That's a great point. Yeah, thank you.
Blair had a question. Blair, you need to unmute.
Oh, Blair, you need to unmute.
Yeah, you're muted. Can you, or maybe, yeah. Are you having trouble?
Yes.
Oh, there you go.
I have technological trouble. I'm so sorry.
That's
I
okay.
so
I can
appreciate
identify.
your presentation. Gloria and I have been doing dream work together for some time. And personally, I work with end of life, not formally, but just holding space for end of life. So I found it fascinating. Thank you so much for your
you're
presentation.
welcome.
I don't have a specific question. I've just been listening. Thank you.
Oh, thank
you. Well,
Thank you very much.
I was telling Christopher earlier that I appreciate the chapter at the end of the book that talks about how it's really not necessary to interpret those dreams at the end of life because they're just experience. They're more experiences than dreams. They're, people say over and over, they're realer than real. And I agree, even though I love dream work and I love dream interpretation, but when I read about those people's dreams, I think they're so profound that you really don't need to interpret them. The unconscious, which is the word Jung used to describe the part of us, that is generating these dreams, knows what it's doing and is preparing us and giving us what we need at that point in our lives, I believe.
Yeah. I've remained profoundly ignorant on all things dreams. And some of it's deliberate. It's just like, I have a lot of education in and around neurobiology, but I don't attempt to decipher this. I just want to have reverence for it without knowing the etiology, without dissecting and analyzing or interpreting. I think patients who are at the end of life are beyond our realm to understand. We haven't been there, and I don't know as it translates to where we're at. And I don't care the source. I don't care. I just think it just have reverence and let it be. I'd say the same thing to the people. You know, dying's this kind of keyhole. You can look through it and you can interpret it to the afterlife, religious and paranormal. And I just think that our role is to remain objective and simply translate what we're hearing and being told and relay it without interpretation.
Yeah.
So we've tried to have fidelity to that.
Mhm. Let's see. Well, let me ask a question. I don't see anyone's hand up right this second.
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, well, okay. My question is, could you elaborate a little more on what you call dignity therapy? I'm in the process of redrafting my living will advanced healthcare directive, so this may be helpful. And also, do you think the field, I think it's called integrative medicine, would be more helpful in when people are dying than what I understood you to say is sort of like an assembly line approach with all these different doctor specialists looking at different organs?
Yeah, you know, when you think of integrated medicine or functional medicine, you think of that terms in more in wellness than illness. I think palliative medicine, by definition, seeks to be view the patient in totality. And your focus isn't just the physical symptology, but existential and practical, be it whether you need a will or support for your family, counseling, all that sort of thing. So I think palliative care does that. Dignity therapy was invented by a guy named Chushnov, who was Canadian from Western Canada. And what it is it's interesting. It's a guided process to help people. It's relay and document key things about their life and identity, their beliefs, their wishes, their hopes, lessons learned. It's like a living will or a eulogy that helps people. And it's remarkable. It gives dignity to people. It dignifies the life rather than being defined by illness or death. And it's a fascinating process. And there's been all sorts of studies looking at the outcomes of this. And it's deeply meaningful for the patient. And it's something that most people then review with their loved ones. And what you hear is, you know, Grandma, I didn't know that. It recontextualizes the life in through a broader lens. And this does it almost like an exercise. So it helps access things when you with questions that have been all validated that you might otherwise think of. So that's what it's called, dignity therapy.
Okay.
Really interesting.
One thing that occurred to me and actually was confirmed in my mind, even though you don't really address it in the book, as far as I remember, is the practice of euthanasia. And it seems to me that knowing what we know and reading the experiences in your book really confirmed the fact that in the last months, weeks, days, and even hours of life before passing, it seems like we are prepared in ways that are so important for a peaceful and smoother transition, emotionally, especially. And it seems that even though I don't judge anyone, in fact, I had a friend who a few months ago chose to end his life with, he lives in a state where it's allowed, and the doctor gave him medicine, and he and he chose the time, and he had his friends and loved ones around him, and he passed in their arms. I don't know. I wasn't there. My daughter was there. I don't know if he had any of these experiences that we're talking about, but it seems to me that could, choosing when you've had enough and you want to move on is understandable. But I hate to think that it would eliminate the opportunity to have these experiences and to reconcile things that, need reconciling sometimes prior to passing. And what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I agree wholly. First of all, physician-assisted suicide is grossly misportrayed. On one hand, it's done essentially in every hospital every day. Somebody in the sense that it's at least active euthanasia by definition. So somebody who's brain dead in a unit non-event, they regularly disconnect life support. On the other hand, I've done this for 23, 24 years, and I can think of maybe 4 cases where somebody was looking for physician suicide. Because the reality is typically there are exceptions. ALS is an exception. Most one of the driving forces is suffering, and there really isn't symptoms which you can't manage, even if that means to the point of sedation. So failing to be palliated is not a reason, I don't think, for physician-assisted suicide. And I've grown ever more cautious of it compared to when I was younger for the reason you're describing. Again, I just have experience has taught me to just have reverence for what happens towards the end of life, that there's serious work to be done that's meaningful. And I'm personally, I'm frightened to interfere and to sterilize people from their own dying. I think much more relevant is overly medicalizing and managing people. So confusing these experiences with confusional states. And I've had a lot of experience with this, people coming out of a hospital. So medicated incorrectly and sterilizing them from their own experiences. There's serious work. There's a lot of living, profound living to do in the final stages of life. And I just personally I don't understand it, but I don't want to interfere with it. There's a better story in there, and I don't want to close the book on them. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else have a question? I don't see any hands
Blair?
up. Blair has one.
Oh, you're muted again. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, you're muted.
She's trying to.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
So it's a little bit off topic. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm still a little struck by Queen Elizabeth's passing, right? And this idea of comfort, that how common a practice is it for people to euthanize their animals so that they can feel comfortable in the dying process?
How come it's okay to euthanize animals? I think a couple of reasons. And a lot of them are practical. I run a working horse farm with a lot of animals, and I think there's a few variables. And this is why I didn't go into veterinary medicine, is that there are people who absolutely euthanize their animals because of the inaffordability of fixing the leg fracture. So there's the practical in terms of the financial.
No, I mean in terms of killing them so that they can die, knowing that they're going to be with their animals.
What?
It occurred to me that Queen Elizabeth's animals, dogs, are not going to be euthanized right away, but it sounded like that's a practice
Well,
to euthanize your animals.
I wasn't sure if, I'm struck by her death too, because I grew up every day singing to her from kindergarten to the 8th grade, God Save Our Queen. So I get it. Yeah, I didn't understand what on earth they were talking about, because I read a quote in the paper that said they weren't going to euthanize her dogs yet. Can you define? I have no idea what they're talking about. Was it really so that they could be with their owner?
That was what I understood it to be.
I have something that came up. The terracotta warriors in China, the emperor was going to kill his entire army. So when he would go to the afterworld, the soldiers would be there with him. And so I am wondering if it has something to do with that maybe they have a belief that they're going to go into the afterworld, and that she would be more comforted to have her dogs there with her. It's the only thing I could come up with.
Yeah, I honestly just didn't understand the reference when I read it.
That's very strange.
Yeah, I just thought it was strange. Even if they were doing it, I was shocked that they would announce it, just because I think that would rub most people the wrong way. There's a lot.
So thanks for entertaining that question. It was just, it has nothing to do with, but it was a curiosity.
Oh, I didn't understand. I read it in the Wire too, and I had no idea what they were talking about. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of cultures that the Egyptians, obviously, that killed people and things so they would be not alone. Just like they.
Well, and in India, the wife, if her husband died, she would throw herself on the funeral pyre.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Wow.
Oh, yeah, that was a practice until last century. They finally outlawed it, because her husband might need her.
God.
Yeah. Very strange. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. Anybody else? You have a statement in your book. It has become easier to live longer, but harder to die well. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. I mean, as a culture, we're death denying, and medicine's death defying. So we live under the false assumption, well, you can live longer, but you don't die as naturally or as well. It's not accepted. There's always this notion that you can do something, that there's a disease or an entity to be fought, or an intervention or a next test. It's just hard to die without somebody doing something. And I mean, even you think in our lifetime, it was not uncommon to hear someone say, well, they died of old age. Now it's hard not to die without a few diagnoses. Actually, most people have about 4 of them. So you're just not allowed to reach an expiration date. You've got to be medicalized in some way. So I think it is a lot harder to die well.
Mm-hmm.
Someone just asked about shared death experiences. Yeah, this fascinates me. So there's a guy in Florida. It's called the Shared Crossing Project.
Yes, it's William Peters. He gave a presentation for us a couple of months ago, I guess.
And I got to be honest, I'm just going to be very, very direct about this. So I don't know what he's talking about. I mean, I know what it is. I know what it is definitionally, but he's actually not the person at the bedside, right? I mean, he's a therapist down the line. So I think he's recounting stories anecdotally he's told.
He has had his own experiences with it. That's what prompted him to begin his research.
Yeah, I read that on a bus in India, and I did read that. I just be honest with you. I don't hear that. I just don't hear people saying it. Now, my trouble with that, am I just am I closed-minded and not receptive to it? But I've done this for a long time. Over 2 decades, I've been present for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people's death. And I just haven't seen it. I've never heard people talk about it. So I pushed him because my issue was that he was recounting. I challenged him about to put it into some kind of scientific framework, which I think he did and published some results, because it couldn't just be anecdotal, right? You got to get somebody. So I think he's done that. I'll be honest, I haven't read it. So my issue is either with myself and not recognizing it. I don't know how I could have been this deaf to it, or blind, but I'll be honest, I don't have it, but it certainly resonates with people, right? You hear people. I get more questions here. The funny thing is when I'm lecturing, people will bring it up. In practice, I don't see it. And I've asked my colleagues, and they're not relaying the same thing, but there's got to be something there, I guess.
Yeah, evidently there are instances, and I've heard of people saying, that they knew when a loved one had passed, even though they didn't even know that the loved one.
That I hear.
Well, that's part of that's considered a death experience.
Okay, because that has been historically labeled as something distinct. So there's deathbed experiences, and then there's deathbed phenomena, and that was the original nomenclature. And the phenomena is truly more phenomenologic. So changes in temperature, sudden wakefulness of somebody who is loved and connected and knowing. That sort of thing. Yeah, that absolutely. Not a lot, but I've certainly heard it. Yeah, if that's what he's referring to, then yes.
Well, that's included. It's not. That's not.
Because the lecture I attended a long time ago was more about people actually having a parallel subjective,
like following the dying person into the initial stages of the afterlife.
Yeah, that I've never actually heard anyone say.
Yeah, I don't know anyone personally who has experienced that, but I think he's pretty sincere. I don't know that he's. I
don't think that's the problem at all. I agree. I don't think it's not sincere. It's that it had to. My problem is that as somebody who has worked in this area, it's hard to face the skepticism unless you put it in some kind of contextual framework that gives it some validity. And otherwise, it becomes hearsay and stories, and it fulfills the prophecy that we're just, it's an abstraction that isn't proven. Whereas opposed to actually, and that was the whole basis of why we did this, was to give it a certain amount of credibility and a certain amount of objectivity. So it's not a personal experience to us. It's an observation that we've made, and we've done our very best to take out confounding variables like confusion, like make sure we videotape people. Like that was all done in an effort to give it credibility. And so that was my only issue, is that when we talk of these things, I think is really important, because I think part of the effort, we need to go beyond preaching to the choir to hopefully enlighten other people who might not by disposition understand this sort of thing. So that was
medical profession.
Yeah. Because ultimately, although I certainly haven't achieved any of it, it would be nice to influence the people who we actually entrust to provide care at Life's End. And so to do that, you have to put it in the language that they recognize and understand.
I think one of the things that really must affect this process in a negative way is how ICUs are set up, with all the beeping machines and the noises and the lights and, being awakened every hour for vital signs or whatever. I know someone who was in an ICU for a couple of weeks and said it was just, you can't get any rest. And I suppose a lot of people die in that environment, and it must not be very conducive to these kinds of experiences.
Well, it's a really clever observation. So yes, you're absolutely right, because you've really captured a lot there. ICUs are famous for creating confusional states. It's called ICU psychosis.
Yeah.
So if you were to go to bed tonight, first of all, there's no day-night, right? There generally aren't windows or aren't light. You're often having to be sedated on events, so there's no true wakefulness. It's no different than, for example, as a torture mechanism, you wake somebody up every time they're trying to fall asleep by tactile stimulus or noise, right? It's what they do to people in war. And what happens is you have your first death, which is mind failure. Before the body dies, your mind dies. But it dies because it goes into cognitive dissonance or disarray or disorganization, where you're frankly confused. And overriding psychosis becomes a thing. So that's ICU psychosis. And it's exceedingly common.
Why don't they do something about that? And what could they do?
I don't know, because when you're there, I don't know the answer to that, because I've spent a lot of time in units, and you need the ventilator. It has to have alarms. It's the overlay of machinery, the fact that the care is that intensive that there is no rest periods. Meds are given frequently and observation is tight. I don't know what you do. There's actually some medications that help with the psychosis that they're using now, that because what it does is basically it induces a more natural state of sleep. So they create some sort of day-night cycle. It's really the sleep disruption, because we don't see people. Our worst symptom isn't physical pain, it's psychogenic pain. And the number one symptom we see is actually horrific confusional states. And usually that's something that disrupts sleep. It could be little cough, having to get up, go to the bathroom a lot, unremitting pain, anything that like that, because dying is progressive sleep. And anything that interferes with that is extremely disruptive and anxiety provoking. So delirium is a huge issue. And in an ICU, it's a monster issue. And when they do studies, it's very interesting. People end up with essentially PTSD after those stays. The lucky ones are the ones that forget.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that seems to help some patients in the ICU is music. And next Friday, we have a medical musician. He's a music therapist. He's a professional classical guitarist. And but he plays not just classical music. He also plays Gershwin and Beatles and a lot of other kinds of music. And his experience, having actually died a couple of times and been resuscitated and then put into a medically induced coma in an ICU, surgical ICU. They couldn't stabilize his vital signs even after he was put into a coma. They could not stabilize his vital signs, his blood pressure, his heartbeat, all of that. And after about, I think it was 5 days, if I'm not mistaken, his wife asked the doctor if she could play some music for him. They were treating him the whole time, but they'd gotten to the point where they didn't think he was going to live because they had seen this kind of thing before, and usually the patient died. And his wife asked the doctor if she could play some music for him, and the doctor kind of reluctantly said, well, only half an hour. And you have to watch him like a hawk. If you see any sign of, anxiety or anything, agitation, you stop immediately. And I want you to put one earbud in his ear and one in your ear so you can control the volume, and 30 minutes max. And so she did that, and she played his favorite piece, which is by Bach, St. Matthew's Passion by Bach. And within that 30 minutes, everything stabilized, his blood pressure stabilized, his heartbeat stabilized, and he remained stable. And they monitored him for the next 3 days. His stability, he never lost the stability again. And so they brought him, finally, after 3 days, they brought him out of the coma, and he went home, and he's fine. And he decided, because he was so grateful for the care that he had gotten, he decided, and also because he wanted to help the other patients who go through this terrible experience of being in an ICU, he decided to come back and play music. And he went into training in music therapy, and he did that for, I think he still does it, but he did it in that particular ICU in New York City, the Beth Israel Hospital, for about 10 years. And anyway,
Beth Israel has one of the finer palliative care programs in the nation. We have actually one of the one of the pioneers of palliative care is there. Beth Israel is remarkable. We have a very, very large expressive therapy program here.
What is that, expressive therapy?
Music, art, movement therapy.
Oh, I see.
So we have a full complement, and our music therapists, their clinical impact, and there's a lot of data on this: reduction of pain meds, anxiety meds, and relief of breathlessness. Yeah, music is a modality that therapeutically is truly remarkable. Some of my closest colleagues are music therapists.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and particularly with children. So it's a very sophisticated clinical tool that's just hugely impactful.
Yeah.
More music, less medication generally.
Yes, I think so. That's
well,
what I'm going to.
The other great gift is how it access and rekindles memories for people, particularly with dementia. So you can have somebody who's not completely nonverbal. It's like if you hear an old tune for when you were in high school and you're flooded with the imagery and memories. And so I've seen people who are otherwise completely nonverbal. And I had a guy, that army thing, dun 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 dun, as they're marching. And you could go in there and go, he'd never say a thing. You go, dun, 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 and he right away he goes into his rhythm. So it's tone, context matters. Music puts people there. It accesses different pathways, just like smell does, but music, I think, even more so. So yeah, it's that's wonderful. You're having somebody speak.
Yeah. His name is Andrew Schulman, and
here it's a very accepted part of our practice.
That's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we're out of time, but thank you so much for making time to be with us.
Oh, you guys are great. These are good conversations. I appreciate it. Goodbye, Buffalo.
Take care. Bye.